Vale. Are you on?
Yeah, so we're going on.
Ready?
Right. Hi to you all. I will start with a short introduction about myself. I'm Patrice Riemens. I'm Dutch, but I'm also French, so that's why that's my mother tongue. So that's why English is a bit franchised. My bio, in fact, is very short. I always use my Serbian bio, which is very nice in this respect. It says Patrice Riemens, born in 1950. Is a social geographer, that's my academic function. Is a propagator of the use of free and open source software, and is member of the Dutch Hackers Club Hippies from Hell, which you see here. I've put my official t-shirt on. Right, and then I will do a small captatio benevolentiae, as it's called in Latin, asking for your indulgence because today is, I'm born in 1950, and today is my birthday. I'm 62. And I see you have not all gone to the beach. I said in the previous introduction that I would be, first, that I don't like to make big talks like lectures and so like professors. It's not my style really, so I hope there will be a lot of interaction actually. And I say that I would speak about 3 issues plus 1. The first is what I've called empire and the situation we are now in, which is a state of emergency or the state of exception. That is a politicologist term actually. The second thing is about illegal knowledge and open knowledge, which I consider to be more or less the same thing in the political dispensation we are in the moment in the age of crisis. And the third thing is about politics related to IT, where one of the things that we see is that completely mad laws and mad measures and mad regulations are enacted concerning the big field of information technology and the use of it in society, things in particular about copyright and that kind of intellectual property and that kind of thing, which appears to be completely clueless, but which in certain sense are not. That's something I would like to demonstrate, and what we can do about it. And then finally, I would like, and that's really something that interaction about that is needed, is to look at the future in fact, to look at the present, which is building up the future, and which some people have termed, or many people have termed, the transition. The idea that we really must go out of the situation we are now and embrace a new situation and do it in a very positive way. And that is by reclaiming autonomy and sovereignty. That's again a bit of a technical term, which I hope to explain also in our own activities, in our own life, in the way our communities are done and are run. Okay, is that, does this give you any idea about what it's going to be about, or is it all kind of, ooh, this is very, what the English call French philosophy, fog, this very foggy kind of thing? Ear-deafening silence. You are not a passive audience, I hope, huh? Okay. Well, the first part is maybe indeed the most fuzzy, the most foggy part, and that is about empire. That says you something? Is it a term that you can as it's called, resonate with? Empire is this. Let's put it very simplistically. Let me propose that we are living under the total subjection of the interest of the current imperial power, the United States of America. It's very complex to say what the United States of America are, in the sense that you cannot immediately say, oh, it's the American government, or it's American companies, or something. It's a very complicated whole, but to put it a bit simplistically, anything that happens at the moment happens more or less by the agency and in the interest of the United States of America. And our independence, our range of action is in the end limited by the interests of the United States of America. That holds specifically for the states, the governments we are in, our judicial system, our economic, the basic of our economic lives, our companies, etc., etc. And that is what some number of writers have called empire. The other aspect, which is a juridical, an aspect of what you may call constitutional law, the thing that is really at the basis of the juridical system we are in, is called the state of emergency, meaning that the ordinary process of justice, the rule of law as we understand it, is in fact being put aside to make for executive privilege, for executive power which decides what is right and wrong. So you can say that one of the aspects of the state of emergency is that the ordinary procedure of independent justice is put aside in favor of absolute right of decision making by the executive. And that executive, again, is in last instance the executive of the United States of America. It's a long route, but it comes to there. And many things that happens in IT that we see in the realm of censorship, in the realm of surveillance, in the realm of so-called intellectual property protection, pertains to this state of emergency. Because a new situation with IT, what has happened is that a new situation has been created by the possibilities of information technology, because information technology has given, in fact, a lot of power to all kinds of actors, individuals, groups, which before that were not really into power, and that creates a really new situation for the powers that be. And the answer to that was basically was a very how you call it, ad hoc, almost an ad hoc reaction to put in place a system. Yes, if that becomes really threatening to us, then we clamp down. We clamp down irrespective of the situation of law. A very good example, even if I'm not a big fan of him, a very good example is the whole way that WikiLeaks has been treated. The whole way that Julian Assange is being not so much prosecuted by Sweden, which I consider to be something relatively in itself, but the whole reaction of the especially the United States, but also other governments to the phenomenon of WikiLeaks and its main personage, Julian Assange. That's a fairly good example of the fact that ordinary law is put aside, both in the criminal sphere and in the civil sphere, and that you see very well in the way banks have, out of the blue, and without any good explanation of it, and without possibility of recourse against it, closed the funding of WikiLeaks. Bank of America, credit cards companies, it's PayPal, etc., etc. It's a very good example that, well, we have the rule of law, we have the possibility of prosecution and defense, we have this equilibrium, we have something that is called the balance of power, and then a situation arises which in fact really threatens, or is perceived as really threatening the authorities, and then everything is put aside. And that is not something new. That has existed for a very long time, actually. And in fact, it has existed for so long time that state sovereignty has been defined by some authors, not so much at what you are doing with this sovereignty, but as the power that you have to put the whole system of law aside. The power to declare the state of emergency. And what we have at the moment is a permanent, just like, in fact, President Bush said it, when the war against terror stated, the war against terror is a war without end. We have now in a situation of a war without end, and a situation of war calls for, well, that's exactly what the state of emergency is. It's a situation of war. And that is what we are, and that is something that you should never forget when you are talking about one of the things, the technology which is, well, more or less symbolic of our age, which is IT, and what has what is pertaining to it and the use you make of it and where it's going. Does it make any sense?
Yes.
Right. So I can move on to the following item, which of course, like everything, is interrelated. As we say in Dutch, everything has to do with every other thing. It's a bit mad, but it's also very true. And it's difficult to handle. But I think really you have to work with it. You cannot, and especially not in our times, you cannot limit yourself to one thing, one discipline, one particular aspect, and say, I'm happy with that. Well, as an individual we can, of course. But I'm happy with that, it doesn't go beyond that, and it has not too much to do with other things. No, everything is really related. Illegal knowledge is something that is as old as established societies. The best example of it was Pharaonic Egypt, where you had a class of high priests which had possession is the right word, of knowledge, and others were not allowed to touch it. In our times, we think that, well, if you say illegal knowledge, people, yeah, it's not something that you immediately understand. Now, the funny thing is that hackers were almost by nature are the holders of illegal knowledge. Why? Because they know things, they have a knowledge that is supposed to be kept in the hands of the people who are authorized by the powers that be to have that knowledge and to use it. Experts, military, government, officials, corporate people in corporate, everyone who is really in ordinary employ and whose knowledge and whose activities relating to knowledge is part of the established order of things. Academics also are under that. Now the interesting thing about academics is that it is supposed to be open, it's supposed to be public. There is no such thing as forbidden knowledge in academics, at least that's what you would think. And then you see that there are areas, and again these areas are often in the IT sphere, where there is a kind of descending, gliding scale of openness. One of the best examples of that is cryptography. Cryptography was seen both in the United States and in country I know a bit more, France, was really the example of restricted knowledge. In France, for instance, well, in the United States it was known that people doing mathematical studies and going into cryptography at a fairly early stage would be captured by the intelligence agencies and asked to work for them. That request was a kind of an offer you could not refuse. In France, they were even quite upfront about it. It was, you work for us or we make your life impossible. In both cases, the knowledge of cryptography went it disappeared from the public because it ended up in the hands of the agencies, which are by definition secret, or it went underground. The opposite of illegal knowledge, well, of secret knowledge is of course open knowledge. And the interesting thing is that you have a political and also an economic situation in which open knowledge is in fact illegal. Why? Because not only open knowledge threatens established authorities and established powers, but also it threatens established interests, established economic interests. Because knowledge in a movement that has started something like, it has started in fact long time ago, but the real impulse has come something like, I would say 20, 25, 30 years ago, that knowledge became really something of commercial value into itself. Knowledge had always a commercial value because you could use it to do things. In fact, the term proprietary knowledge dates from before the war. There was economic like World Coase has started research which was showing that one of the reasons why companies were growing large is that they wanted to. There was a reason that they preferred to make economic transactions within the firm rather than doing it with outsiders. And one of the main reasons to do that is that they wanted to keep the knowledge of production processes to themselves and not share it with others, which they should have done if they were engaging in exchanges with other companies. But nowadays, knowledge itself has become really valuable, and that's how the whole idea of intellectual property as value unto itself came about. And that the idea has come that is so valuable that it has to be protected, and it has to be treated the way capitalism tends to make business, and that is by, in fact, it's not even it's capitalism, but our very idea of economy. I don't know if you also had economy in class in high school, where they were saying that the basic of economy is scarcity. Resources, time, well, all kinds of things are scarce, and because they are scarce, their value, and the more scarce they are, the more value they have. Well, imagine that things are not scarce at all, and knowledge is one of these things that are, in fact, in a certain sense, knowledge is as abundant as the sun. It's simply there. But you can make it scarce by restricting its access. And that is what is a lot of things that is happening that have been going on for quite a long time. Again, in the sphere of copyright, in the sphere of intellectual property, and so has to do with the fact with the art making knowledge artificially scarce. Behind that, there's a whole bunch of interests, of political moves, of ideologies, which tend to abide by this system of making knowledge scarce, of treating knowledge as something valuable, of restricting it to certain groups, certain people, making pay for it, and hence excluding a lot of people, and not making it, and against it, a whole movement of making it open, making it generally accessible, taking the economic valuation out of it, taking the money part out of it, and make it what it is, available to the general public. And at that moment, you see the very traditional opposition, ideological, political opposition between those who favor a system which is hierarchic, which few people have the majority of resources and the majority of people have less, against those who say it's for everybody, make it public, make it egalitarian, try to make it horizontal, etc., etc. That's anecdotically, I came to this illegal knowledge thing because in 1985 I joined a Dutch group which had started 2 years before, which was called Bilvet, the Foundation for the Dissemination of the Illegal Knowledge. En in Dutch de Stichting ter Bevordering van de illegale wetenschap. That comes to Bilvet. And when I met the people, there were 4 of them, 5 of them, I realized that in fact they were not aware themselves of how right they were by calling what they were doing illegal. They were simply thinking, we are doing something out of academia, and we are looking at, for instance, in things from many angles at the same time, which is called pluridisciplinarity or interdisciplinarity. A very interesting aspect of academia where everybody is talking about it, but nobody wants to put it in practice. And actually, in the practice, you will see that they, on one side, they will advocate it, and on the other side, they will combat it when it happens for real. That's what these people were doing. But I said immediately, no. it goes much beyond that. You are really doing something that is illegal, that will be made illegal. Mind you, there was one politician and that made kind of step to the third thing. This one Italian politician was very smart about that. Very smart guy. His name is Berlusconi. Berlusconi invented two things. Well, his advisors did. One was to, and that directly relates to the sphere of IT, under the popularity of free and open source software, I tend to restrict it to free software, especially in Italy, and the way proprietary software holders, and especially one particular company from the United States, felt threatened. A law was put before Parliament. It never passed. It stayed in limbo. But it was a proposal, and the mere existence of such a proposal says already a lot. That law was saying that you will not be allowed to use any software in public, and for instance here, because we are a public, and there are some machines running here. Maybe I would like to run some slides, and so, and that would make use of software. Now that software, you would not be allowed to use that software. That software had not been properly certificated, and that certification procedure was to happen by a specific agency of the Italian state, which was established in Udine, which is a provincial town in northern Italy. Had very, very few agencies, very few, how do you call it, branches. Was open, well, as a joke, I said the third Wednesday of every uneven month, between 11 and 3 in the afternoon. Registration charge for your software was something like to the tune of €100,000. And mind you, immediately there were two companies which immediately wanted to register. One particular company established in Redmond, state of Washington, United States of America, and an Italian company that nobody had ever heard of. That was Berlusconi and his political party's idea of regulating the chaotic world of software development. The far more, even more general, smarter move of Berlusconi, and that almost made it to law if he had stayed in power, was that the laws about the security of the state, don't know, Denmark is not really the country where people have a big awareness of the state going after political enemies. But France is, United States is, I mean, United States made the film which is called Enemy of the State. But Italy is also, Italy has a long history of social struggle, which is political struggle, which has been repressed very violently by the state. Think of the 70s and so on. And Berlusconi decided that the laws about the security of the state had to be modernized. And the laws about the security of the states are basically that any action that threatens the security of the government, of the state, will be repressed. You will be dragged for justice, you will go to prison, etc., etc. And he said this is no longer, it's no longer actual. Now, actually, we should go after the security of the state, which is based on the idea of enemy of the state, should be rephrased as enemy of the system. So basically, being anti-capitalist was sending you to jail. That was Berlusconi's idea. And you think, that doesn't make sense. But then think through that, for instance, in our constitution, in the European Constitution, the neoliberal economic order that we have at the moment is written into the constitution. That the European Commission is trying to put laws about the deficit of the state, the budgetary deficit, into the constitution, that you need to have an equilibrated state budget. These all things are political decisions. People could decide, no, why not spend more money than we have? That's after all, it's a political decision. No, that would be made impossible and put closed into the Constitution. That brings me into what I was saying, the cluelessness of politics, or the apparent cluelessness of politics and politicians in matter IT. You are probably familiar, I'm not familiar with the situation in Denmark itself, but the European situation is very clear, and the situation in the, say, the regulated, more or less regulated global economy is that you see laws and you see rules which do not make sense. And they do not make sense because they appear to be counterproductive, they go against creativity, they go against innovation, and they are in the defense of established interests. I think I do not need to go into the whole battles about intellectual property, about copyright. As you are not allowed to do this, you must pay for that. And it is very repressive. You have seen things like the French law about Adobe, the law about the protection of creativity and the furthering of the digital economy, something like that, and which says, for instance, that people who have infringed it 3 times will be deprived of internet connection or sent to jail, or this kind of nonsense. And it looks like making no sense at all. So the idea, and that's what people do, and an instance was, for instance, the European Digital Rights Initiative is doing it all the time, is to try to explain politicians that it is not a good idea. And it doesn't work. And it doesn't work for, I think, for a quite simple reason, that in fact the politicians know damn well what they are doing. First, they are following the interests of the people who basically pay them. That's second, they are going also very much along the line of their own ideology, which is fairly restricted and which still has a view of information technology as something very threatening in itself, for the simple reason that they don't understand it themselves and they don't use it actively themselves. And, but foremost, I think that it is a default mode. It is the way they reason, and it is very, very difficult to argue against that, because they never have made the case rationally for themselves while they are doing it. So the way I explain the whole thing, why they are doing it, and it's aberrant, it's stupid, it's bizarre. I say, well, but it's, to quote the famous Microsoft statement, it's not a bug, it's a feature. They really want it. And why they really want it, in my view, is, I use a strange expression, well, it's simply hardwired in their reptilian brain. It's not their ratio that speaks, it's a, well, it's a basic feeling. And actually, they don't like you. So why should they do something that why should they do something that you would like to happen? Okay, that was that were the 3 things. Now I want some questions, interaction, or whatever before I go to the supplementary transition thing. Otherwise, you guys are very silent, and there's at least one of you that looks at me like.
You said that think that the U.S. is behind all the mastermind of the empire behind all the bad things happening, or whatever's happening, good or bad. What about China?
Well, first, what about the United States? Because when I'm saying this, it's horrendously simplistic. And you get the kind of monster sitting in Washington and having devised it all. Basically, in Washington, they are clueless and they are dead afraid of what's coming. there again, they react the way they are through their default mode. In the tragicality of our time is that the people we would call the perpetrator are probably even more afraid than the victims are, and the victims of their perpetrations are. That's one thing. China is an extremely interesting theme, and I don't know what exactly I can say about. I would say about China because there are very good reasons to take China as, in fact, both as a future hyperpower and as a far smarter hyperpower than what we have seen till now. When I say that the United States, that's in Washington, they are both afraid and clueless. In China, I think they are afraid, but they are certainly not clueless. I tend to believe that the way China is run has a far longer tradition of a far longer experience of power than we have. In a certain sense, if you say, well, the Chinese power, our power is 200 years old, which is both the age of the United States and the age of reason, of enlightenment, which is the basis of our current, say, societal ideology. Then the Chinese one is 5,000 years. That's a bit longer. It has been dormant for a very long time, but it has always been there. That's a view. But say in 2 years' time, China collapses completely in civil wars and in factionalism and in regional strife. And where are you with this?
That could also happen in the US.
That could also happen in the US. I completely agree. In fact, I even more than agree. I was saying for quite a long time, I was in a figure that is called in Dutch, the wish is the mother of the thought. I was saying, United States, regional contradiction becomes so big that it will fall apart. It will realize that, for instance, officially California is an independent republic. The name of the state of California is the Republic of California. It's not implemented, but it could very well, and that's for instance, in the time of the dot-com boom, people were saying that actually the national product of California was far bigger than that of a middle-sized nation in the rest of the world. So yeah, well, the thing is that anything can happen. I mean, we are now in an accelerating phase towards something which is systemic collapse. And systemic collapse is not a question of when. Sorry, it's not a question of if, it's a question of when. But when is also a very important question. So yes,
could also be a question of how much or how far.
Anything can happen. Yeah. Anything can happen because things, once they happen very fast. So if you, a possible example to illustrate that is if you make a kind of micro-analysis of events, of sequencing of events that led to the First World War in August, say the period between the assassination of Archduke Ferdinand in Sarajevo and the start of the hostilities, which was 3rd of August 1914. It's a period of very few weeks, of which the last 10 days are crucial. The characteristic of the last 10 days before the First World War is what happened the next day was impossible to imagine the day before. That means that there were people who were saying what would happen the next day. They said, if we do this today, tomorrow this will happen. And these people are completely crazy. This is impossible. We are going to do that, fine, but the consequences you are saying are ridiculous. And then the next day, these consequences happened. And then you will do what you would do the day after that. And then it starts all afresh. Something that is completely parallel in the Euro crisis. Yeah. If you take back how the Euro crisis has developed, and you look at say, go back, flash back to December 2011 and look at the situation in February 2012. No. This is aberrant scenario, impossible. This is what we are living today again. I mean, I went on, well, not really on holiday, but I was pretty sure that by May, June, the system would collapse, especially in Greece. It has not happened. And in fact, by July, I was thinking, oh, well, it will last a little. And now we are back to square one. And we have been back to square one, I don't know how many times. Now it's Spain. But yeah. Again, what I wanted to say, you cannot say when collapse happens, but when it starts, it goes very fast.
You mentioned, you alluded to the ACTA which was rejected by the European Parliament.
Yeah.
I always have a feeling that it was rejected by the European Parliament for the wrong reasons, because they really used it used it in their ongoing battle with the Commission, in my opinion, rather than they didn't understand what it was about really. Yeah. But they knew they have been taken for a ride by the Commission.
They are constantly taken for a ride by the Commission, and actually they are going to be taken for a ride again by the Commission, because ACTA is going to be reenacted in what is it, Qatar, the trade agreement with Canada. And the trade agreement with Canada will be far more difficult to combat it, because the trade agreement with Canada is a wholesale agreement in which the smuggled in ACTA is only a very small part, and you can either accept it in whole or reject it in whole. So it will be accepted in whole, and then we will have ACTA all over again. But okay.
But we might of course be so lucky that they will understand that that was going on and reject it once more. But I'm not sure about it.
The thing is that see, you have again something which is very typical of our age, but maybe has always been there, is that things move in a certain direction, and at the very same time they move in the opposite direction. In Europe, you have a tendency that definitely the parliament will get more and more power. In fact, the way Europe is organized doesn't make any sense in the democratic sense, because there is no representation. How can you imagine a state, a country, with a parliament which has in fact no power over the executive? Why has a parliament no power about the executive? Because there is a fiction that the executive itself is responsible towards national governments, which have the mandate of their own parliaments. But in fact it doesn't make sense, because everybody knows that the European, that Brussels, as quote unquote Brussels, is basically used by national politicians to enact national politics, which they cannot enact at home. So basically what you do is you know that your parliament is not going to accept what you want. So you go to Brussels, where you meet colleagues which have exactly the same problem. You do one big round of what we call in Dutch cattle trade, and then you go back to your own people and say, well, sorry folks, but Brussels has decided that it's going to be that way. And the way to enact that is, of course, to have a strong executive in Brussels and an important parliament. And the tussle of war between Commission and Parliament in Brussels is going on for I don't know how long, but in fact everybody knows it's a farce.
But they are slowly, at a glacial pace. Yeah. They are getting more power.
Yeah. That's true. They are getting, but That is something that happens in a much more general plane. I mean, human rights, if you take something like human rights, globally are better and better protected at a glacial pace. Dictators and other perpetrators of human rights violations and crimes are less and less secure. And yet, the most horrible things continue to happen. Sometimes they even happen even more just because of that threat of being less secure, being prosecuted. One of the theories why Mugabe is not going to abandon his presidency of Zimbabwe is that he knows the day he abandons it, he's shipped straight to The Hague.
Yeah.
So instead of being, and Mubarak had exactly the same attitude.
Yeah.
So it is a very, well, it's what's called a dialectic process, but it's, yeah. Now, about the other thing is that, well, can use the famous Leninist phrase by Lenin, "Stir the alarm, what is to be done?" And not in the sense of now we know what is to be done, or we should think about what is to be done, because that's always a kind of experiment, and it's always something that is developing, and that should not be dogmatic about it, but you can think about it. And that thinking about the way out of the crisis, or rather, since the crisis is going to happen, what they're going to do after that, is well, generally put under the term transition towns. Are you familiar with this concept of transition? The post-oil. So recently, Monbiot said, well, there have been studies, I've not followed it very closely, but I understand that there has been, a few weeks ago, a kind of theoretical reversal, that actually peak oil was not going to happen. Have you heard anything about that? Peak oil, you know what it is? Blank silence. What's going on?
Please explain.
What?
Please explain.
Peak oil is, well, our economy is, apart from being a network society and IT everywhere, our economy runs on oil. It's running on petroleum, on gas, etc. For a long time, there has been, started with the Club of Rome, the end of, what was it called? The end of, well, in the 70s, there was a study which was chaired by
Limits to growth.
Limits to growth. That's it, exactly. And one of the aspects of the limits to growth, the principal aspect of it, is the end of the resource base, and one of that was oil. And the theory about the end of oil was the peak oil theory, which said that at some stage the amount of discoverable reserve was getting lower than the actual consumption. So that for a very long time, one was always discovering more oil than we actually needed, projecting our future consumption. And at some stage comes the moment that in fact our reserves are dwindling compared to our ever-increasing consumption. And that moment has been variously given as being happening in 2000, happening in 2005, happening in 2010, happening today, or happening in a few months, or just next year. But in any case, it's here, it's very close. In the beginning, it was completely derided as nonsense. By now, more or less, it had been accepted. And at the moment that it almost became mainstream, there have been developments which say, no, in fact, at the current level of prices, it becomes so it becomes attractive enough to go after alternative ways of going after oil, that huge, gigantic new reserves can actually be put into exploitation if the petrol price, the oil price, is at $100 a barrel or something around that. Okay, but transition was about life after oil, life after the collapse. But for society, for us, that means mostly, I think, that we reclaim autonomy in the things we are in our everyday life, in the sense that we make our everyday life much less dependent on that complex global economy we are living in. And yeah, that will entail a lot. IT can play an important part in that, if IT is indeed made, in a certain sense localized and made much less commercial, much less corporate than it is at the moment. And that will transition will probably entail that a lot of things will be done. We are now in a very globalized economy, but that globalized economy is in fact run and is to the advantage of a minority of people, a very small minority in fact, even though we have the impression, especially if we are here, and if we have some kind of regular employment and enjoying some quite okay wage and so, that we are part of that minority, even though in fact our situation is quite precarious. And yeah, I would think we have to look at what will we do, what would we do if we are put into a different situation. When and yeah, that collapse of the system can very well happen, and what are we going to do next? And I think that will be much more local, and I think we should better prepare to it. But how? I have idea about it, but I think that mostly it's not worth so much to talk about it. It is much more sensible that people are convinced of it by themselves and start their own research and look into their own life and their own environment, how they are going to do that. So in a certain sense, I could say that I both announce this situation, but I'm also reluctant to concretize really what I think is going to happen and what is going to look like, and especially what we should do. Far more, I would almost say, yeah, that's for us, but it's also for you to think and to decide about it. So that's but I think it's really important to be, without getting into panic, into stress, or abandoning everything you are doing, but to keep it in say, a kind of, you'd not even say back of your head, but fairly aside. So as one of the screens on your big screen, yeah, what are we going to do next? That's more or less what I have to say. But I hope you would say something.
You got something to reflect on. Any comments? Any questions?
No, of course, a lot of things I can think afterwards and think, oh yeah, I should maybe have told this or said that, or whatever. But on a totally different plane, I've heard that with pleasure that a lot of you intend to go to OHM, Observe, Hack, Make in 2013.
Mm.
So that, yeah, well, I really enjoy you to do so. And of what is that type of thing? I think it's called genomic, but I'm not sure. I know quite well the people organizing it. I'm not in the organizing committee, but I can say that they are very approachable. So please interact with them and go on the wiki and do things and so. I was at all previous camps, save the last one. So I kind of know more or less how it's organized and how it's being run. And the kind of formula is evolving, which is more or less the same with the CCC camps, with the organization in villages. And there you have quite an example of what's called in Dutch sovereignty own circle, that people, groups do their own things locale, and that's called a village. So you will have a Danish village, I guess. Well, that's exactly the idea, that you can do a lot of things on your own and still be part of a larger community. And one of the big misunderstandings of our time has been that if you want to do things in big, you cannot do things in small anymore. So the idea that many small things make a big thing, and that the big thing, of course, is more than the sum of the small things, has been lost to the idea that if you have a big thing, it should be done efficiently and you should bypass all these local things and concentrate power and decision making. And in fact, it's much better to do it, to start with a small scale and see how it builds up. Even in Europe, there's a nice term for it. It's called subsidiarity. And subsidiarity is the idea that decision making should be done at the lowest possible level. So that anything that can be decided at low level should not be decided at high level. The practice is of course completely different, but the idea is there. And one of the things of these camps, they are run according to the subsidiarity model. So please enjoy that. And,
I'm sure we will. So,
I'm sure you will make it.
yeah. Thank you very much for sharing with us.
Thank you very much for you're supposed as speaker to start with. I'm very honored and pleased to be here. I didn't do it, but I do feel it. Thank you very much for having me here.
Thank you.
Thank you.